cyber war, as opposed to the cyber espionage that goes on every day. So if you're worrying about cyber war, the first thing that happens in all of these scenarios, and it happened in your game the other day, the electric power grid goes down, right? So why is the electric power grid connected to the internet?
Right.
And is it really beyond the technical capability of all of these people here in this room to design an electric power grid that can't be attacked from the internet?
Or when one part goes down, the rest just go into lockdown immediately.
So why aren't we doing it? Because it would require the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to get serious about regulation. And they haven't been. They say they're going to regulate this year. They say they're going to fine people this year who don't have good cybersecurity. I don't know how they're going to fine anybody because they have no staff that would be able to do an audit of any electric power company for cybersecurity.
Mark, these guys are talking, and I'm talking about doing these incredibly sweeping, global, pervasive acts. Are there things that are true and core about privacy that you need to think about when you're making policy like this?
Yeah, well, I mean, privacy ends up being the collateral damage, in the cyber war battles, because people play out the scenarios and they say, gee, if we can't do real-time attribution, we won't know where people are coming from, we can't shut them down. If we don't catch in advance of the act the indicators that might have told us something was about to happen, we leave ourselves vulnerable. So every one of these
24 scenarios
well, of
where
course,
it's
but
necessary to give it up.
Every one of these scenarios becomes a justification for some new type of intrusion on the user who's frankly doing nothing wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are the people who are just online taking advantage of a service who are getting caught up in the cyber war scenarios and are now being, in one of, remember John Poindexter's proposal, he wanted to do eDNA. He wanted to hash every person's DNA with every online transaction they had when they went to a website or an email, because that way you'd have perfect authentication. You know exactly what everybody...
Total information awareness.
Exactly.
Well, where do you stand on authentication? You said a minute ago it would be okay under some circumstances.
Well, I think there are ways, and boy, to talk to this group about this issue is really to, sand to whatever it is, Newcastle, coals to Newcastle, right? But I mean, speaking primarily as a lawyer, I've always been intrigued by the idea that you could separate, authentication from identification. And David Schaum, who you honored the other day, had a big influence on me because he said there should be ways to do this. There should be ways to ensure that, money is moved between people and both sides are happy without exposing people to the risk of identity theft because you start building up huge profiles. So I'm still hoping that we find those kinds of solutions, those solutions that build in strong authentication, but do so in a way that don't leave individuals vulnerable to this kind of deep profiling.
But does privacy, individual identity, the sanctity of the individual, if you will, have any common standard? Yesterday, I saw Carol Bartz, the head of Yahoo, and she says, people tell you one thing about what they want with privacy, but then you offer them a service and they'll give you up all this stuff. What they say and what they want are two different things. And then there's an issue of sovereignty. Different countries will tell you.
To me, that's always been a very unfair question. I mean, let's think about this one. Many of you are doing online commerce, right? So imagine a scenario where you could say to your customers, gee, we'll give you, 5 cents off if you choose not to do secure HTTP, because it's a little cheaper for us if you don't do it. And so we'll return the savings to you. I mean, is there any scenario under which it makes sense to actually give people that offer to have less online security so they can save 5 cents? And a lot of these privacy deals kind of have that feel about them.
Yeah, but the problem
you can expose people to a vulnerability that if you think about it for a moment, why would we want to do that?
So a little paternalism is a good thing.
The internet and our society is full of that kind of pricing for surrendering privacy. Every time someone offers you a free thing and you just have to register, and in registering you give data, the reason it's not free...
But what if it's a phishing site? I mean, let's take that example. What if the free thing they're offering you turns out to be,
That's
going
exactly
through your
right.
bank account?
That's exactly right. So the question is, now, how do you deal with that problem? You can, of course, regulate it away. You can basically say people don't have the right to post pictures of themselves on Facebook. They don't have the right to get free offers in return for giving their identity information up. You could regulate that. The other thing, though, you could do is you could educate people. We are really bad at educating people on operational security, and we don't take it seriously. Now, you know, that's often a way of fobbing off the problem by saying just educate people. But I would argue that when we structure our security, particularly the interface between that and the user, we need to construct it in a way that takes account of the psychology of the way people actually behave. Not the way people who are steeped in security behave, but how the average person behaves. So that means, you know, the way we deal with passwords is often not realistic in terms of what people actually are willing to do to log on every day. That means we've got to look at other kinds of systems for securing that work with the psychology of the user, and I think that's a great area to be focused on as part of this effort.
Is that a government chore?
Well, I think, frankly, it's a great opportunity for the private sector because as people value privacy and security, and here I confess, my firm does counsel people in the cybersecurity space, so, you know, don't be shocked at my saying this. There is an opportunity in the private sector to promoting that value in a way that is efficient for people, and we haven't done enough of that.
Well, I agree with that, but I think the trick is to help people not make mistakes, right? I mean, sometimes people say this is about, you know, putting less on the dashboard and more under the hood. You want to build in the safeguards so that people don't find themselves tripping up. But if you end up with a bunch of privacy policies, for example, which is how most users experience privacy issues on the internet, I don't think those have been very helpful because the privacy policies basically say, this is how we're planning to use your information. If you're not happy about it, you know, go to another site.
The government role in all of this is to have some body, some institution that people can trust with Republicans and Democrats on it, with privacy rights people on it, perhaps with subpoena power, that protects our privacy rights and our civil liberties. And after the Homeland Security Department was created, the Congress mandated that there be a privacy protection and civil liberties protection board. And it's been a joke. And it continues to be a joke under the Obama administration. Congress wanted it. I think we all want it. But where are the demands to actually staff it and have it go out there and do something? You know, because of the abuses that occurred in the last administration with NSA and others, we need to reestablish some government credibility in the areas of privacy rights and civil liberties. One way to do that is to have a vigorous cyber, not just cyber, but in general, a civil liberties and privacy protection board, a vigorous one.
Yeah, I mean, here, you know, I agree with Richard very much. This is all about the need to establish oversight mechanisms that are equal to the new authorities you've given government.
Exactly.
If you're going to create lots of new systems of surveillance and tracking, you need on the other side of the balance, you know, people with the expertise and skills to assess if they're working as they should be working.
And legal authority.
Yes, and legal authority. And by the way, I'll also put in a plug, you know, for the President's Civil Liberties Oversight Board. Now, this was another part of the creation of Homeland Security post 9/11 reform. It said, listen, we really need an independent agency in this country that has some authority to look into these privacy issues, isn't within a single agency, doesn't answer, you know, directly to the White House, and those positions haven't been filled, and it's a real disappointment.
It's a big disappointment for an administration that ran a campaign that said it was going to take care of these issues.
But recognize this, I mean, the issues we're dealing with in terms of what people are willing to surrender on the internet in terms of privacy and how you create a system that at least cautions people. This happens much too rapidly for the tried and true method of let's get lawyers in, the lawyers will investigate lots of subpoenas, hearings, television, and then someone winds up being punished. We've got to figure out a way, and to me, you see, there's got to be public demand for this, which means the public has to understand what's at stake when they give up elements of their identity and their privacy.
Well, you know how that happens.
But I do think there's an opportunity. You've got to seize it, though, and this is where the government could use some of its bully pulpit to explain to people what the consequences are of some of what they are sacrificing in terms of identity theft. And, you know, frankly, there are businesses out there that are now beginning to use identity theft as a wedge for beginning to promote privacy-protected products. Mm-hmm. But you've got to find ways, when you build your systems, to be able to allow the user to protect privacy without being cumbersome. And I'll predict this. As we speak now, there may not be a great demand for this, but I am very confident that at some point, something will happen that will affect consumers in a big way, and then the company or companies that have the ability to say, we have an architecture that protects your security and privacy will be a quantum leap ahead of everybody else.
There is always a call to action.
This